Peter says, what's in store for us? How do we know we're on the right path? Jesus would answer that by saying, well, the first way you know that is, are you being treated like me? Are you being treated like your master? Your master was persecuted. If you're being treated like me, then that's a pretty good indication that you are on that right path. So how are we to understand this? Is this really an occasion where Jesus is saying something to us that we, I think, instinctively know that we should regret or reject, which is to say that Jesus says, you cannot outgive me. If you give a house, if you give your house to the poor, then I'll return 5 more houses to you. Or if you go and you sell an acre of land and give that money to the poor, then I'm going to return it with 10 more acres. That's how this passage is typically understood. Is that what Jesus is really declaring here? Is He really declaring this system in which you cannot outgive God in this life in physical ways? If you leave your wife or your family in order to go and serve, then I'm going to return that to you 100-fold. So when Jesus is speaking of the returns here, let's be careful to understand what He means and what He doesn't mean. Now, how are we to determine what Jesus means and what He doesn't mean? The simplest and the clearest and the most foolproof way to determine exactly what Jesus means by these rewards is simply to look to the ones to whom He made the promise and look to how Jesus fulfilled the promise to them. And from that, we can with confidence say, however Jesus fulfilled the promise to the ones He made it to directly is what He meant. So does Jesus mean this promise for us? In an indirect way, yes. But He clearly is making the promise directly to the apostles. So, if Jesus made the promise to the apostles, we should be able to draw a straight line from the apostles and the fulfillment of that to what Jesus intends when He says it, or otherwise the only other option is that Jesus didn't keep His promise to the apostles, which we of course reject. If Jesus makes this assurance to them, He kept it. How did He keep it? Did the apostles die wealthy people? The apostles all died, we would assume, penniless or close to it. That is what the church tradition teaches us emphatically, is that they gave everything, indeed their lives too. And so if we can't say that what Jesus means here is that when Peter left his house, well, he ended up, in a short span of time after that, he had a house over here in Samaria and another house down here in Judah and another house over here on the banks of the Jordan, and he just had houses everywhere. If we can't say that, then that's not what Jesus meant. If we can't say that Ananias and Sapphira, who sold the land and gave part of it to the church, that God returned that with multiple more lands, or Barnabas right before, he's even better example, Barnabas who sold a piece of property and gave it to the church, and yet God didn't return more property upon him, then clearly that's not what Jesus was intending. Or otherwise, He broke His promise to the very first people He gave it to. So what does Jesus mean when He assures them, in this age, there will be a return upon you of all that you have left for my name's sake? So to see this, we just simply need to look at how this promise was fulfilled in the life of the apostles through the book of Acts and through the epistles. And so let's just take these 3 categories together. There's the category of relationships, and then there's the category of house, and then there's the category of lands. Let's look at the house first. So Jesus says, if you leave houses for me, don't worry, there's more coming. You cannot forsake a house for my name's sake and then be left houseless. What Jesus is saying is that among the people of God, there are many houses. And if you leave a house for my name's sake, my people will supply your need. That's how the economy of the kingdom of God works. If you leave a house on my behalf, you won't be left homeless, for I will raise up the people of God who own so many resources that they will provide the thing that you've left for me in order to accommodate your need. And you say, where in the world did you pull that out of? Well, just the examples of the book of Acts and the epistles. Think with me, for example, the one who's saying these words, Peter, we've left everything for you. Think about Peter in Acts chapter 10. Remember the story in Acts chapter 10? Right before he goes, chapter 9 there, right before he goes to Cornelius, the Gentile centurion's house, right before he goes and he has that vision. Remember the vision of the sheet that comes down and the animals that he's told to eat? Where was he when he had that vision? We're told he was living in the house of Simon the tanner. Furthermore, we're told that he was about to eat. So he's living with Simon the tanner, and apparently Simon's wife has prepared him lunch. He's there in a house. That's the house Jesus is talking about. Jesus is not saying to Peter, Peter, if you sell a house and give the money to the poor and come and follow me, then I'm going to return that with personal ownership of 10 more houses. That's not what Jesus is saying. He's saying, whatever you forsake for my name's sake, you as part of the family of God will experience the family of God providing whatever that need may be whenever you need it. Think about Paul as he goes to Philippi. He's there in Philippi and he talks to Lydia. Lydia, the wealthy seller of purple cloth. She is converted. She comes to faith. And we're told that in Acts chapter 16 that she compelled Paul to stay with her. That she says, come and stay with us. And we can kind of hear Paul saying, no, that's okay. I'm a tent maker. We've got a tent. I'll just put up a tent. But she says, come to my house and stay. And she prevailed upon us. No, Paul, I've got extra rooms. You've got a house. Or think of Romans 16 and verse 23. There's a fellow by the name of Gaius. And we're told here, Gaius, Paul says, who is host to me. So as Paul is here writing the letter to the Romans, he's saying, I'm living with this Christian, this brother named Gaius, who is host to me and also host to the whole church. And we could go on to examples like Acts chapter 18, when Paul says that they left there, they went to the house of a man named Titius Justus. His house was right beside the synagogue. So this was a believer whose house was conveniently located right beside the synagogue where Paul was teaching every day, and he just moves in with them. There are so many examples of this through the book of Acts, and we can see in the epistles how the family of God, who has been given the resources to say, here is a brother who has left his house to come here to minister. He will have our house. So that's what Christ means by house. He doesn't mean that you will have personal ownership of 100 houses in place for every one that you give away. Likewise, He doesn't mean this for relations. He doesn't mean that if you leave your spouse to go to work in this ministry position here or over there, or you go and you're planting churches over there, that, oh, guess what? You'll have another wife over there and another wife over here. Of course, He doesn't mean that. What He means is that the family of God, wherever you go, the family of God will be there to be your family for you. Look at in your notes here, Romans 16 and verse 13. Greet Rufus, chosen in the Lord, also his mother, who has been a mother to me as well. Or most significantly, think about Jesus' words earlier in Mark's gospel when his biological family comes for him and he says, mother, my brothers, here are my mother and my brothers and my sisters, those who hear the word of God and do it. And so what Jesus is saying here is no matter where you go, that the economy of the family of God will be there to be mother or brother or father or sister or son to you. That you will not leave family members behind and go in such a way that you are then left familyless. The family of God will be that for you. So what about lands? Lands is a little bit more difficult to think through. But when Jesus says, if you leave lands on my behalf, no worries. There will be more lands that are abundantly returned to you. Now, when we think of lands, what we think of is literally personal ownership of property, of land, of dirt. And of course, the ancient Jews knew of that as well. But to the ancient Jew, land meant something more than it means to us. To the ancient Jew, land meant a homeland, a people that are mine, a culture that is mine. Sort of like Ruth says to Naomi, my God, or your God is my God, and your people are now my people. And so that the idea of land for the ancient Jew encompassed not just a spot of dirt, but it was a home, a people that was mine, that a people to whom I belonged. And so Jesus is saying, if you leave a people for the sake of the gospel, not to fear, there are another people that will be given to you. Now, the scriptural examples of this are, quite frankly, so many that it would really be overwhelming to see this. But nonetheless, let me just point out to you that that is the theme, or at least one of the themes of the New Testament, which is to say that when we enter the family of God, we enter into a new people. And a new people are now our people. As Paul will say to the Ephesians, to the Gentiles there in Ephesus, he'll say, once you were a stranger people, once you were alien people, but now you are fellow citizens with the saints and the members of the household of God. Now, we could trace this through the book of Acts and through the epistles, but it would quite frankly be overwhelming because it is so present in the New Testament, this idea of the new people of God, the new people of God who have now been grafted in, and now they make up this new people. And we see throughout the New Testament this fusion of the Gentile and the Jewish believer into one people. And that's a great theme of the New Testament. And this is Jesus' meaning. Jesus is saying to his apostles who say, we've left everything. He says, you won't outlive the family of God. You won't leave a home and be left homeless. For wherever you go, there will be family of God who will take you in and say, here is your room, here is your house, our house is your house. Let us minister to you in this way. Most of us have experienced something like this. I've experienced this. I've experienced it when we lived in Colorado, when we lived far from family members, and there would be brothers and sisters there in the church there who would say to us, you are a long way from your family. Come and eat Sunday lunch with us. Come and have Thanksgiving with us. Come and have Christmas with us. Or when we lived in Maggie Valley or even here, I've experienced this in Central America. Probably most of us have experienced the same kind of thing, that when you are among the people of God, there is a real, tangible reality that you are among family who will say to you, our home is your home. Our culture is your culture. Our people is your people. You are family to us. There is this eternal spiritual bond in the family of God, but that eternal spiritual bond also manifests itself when the family of God sees one who has left something on behalf of Christ, and they come to say, what you've left for Him, we will return it tenfold for you here. And so this is Jesus' meaning. So Jesus is not saying that whatever you leave, whatever personal property you leave, I'll return more personal property to you. Whatever wealth you might leave, I will return more wealth to you. He cannot possibly be saying that, because if that's what He's saying, then what He's saying is the very thing that I just warned you about, which is the greatest barrier to faith and obedience and trust, I'm going to give it to you. What kind of sense would that make? We just talked about the rich young ruler, in which Jesus, the lesson there is great wealth is a strong inhibitor to faith. What sense would it make for then Jesus to then turn around and say, oh, whatever wealth you leave for my name's sake, I'm going to abundantly return it to you. I'm going to return the temptation. I'm going to just stack upon you more and more barriers to faith. That makes no sense. And so instead, what Jesus is saying, this is still a spiritual reward, so to speak. but it is a spiritual reward that manifests itself in physical ways here in this life and in this earth right now. And so this is Jesus' meaning. And so he is speaking here of these apostles who are leaving, these apostles who would go on to form the diaconate ministry in the book of Acts. And this speaks powerfully into the diaconate ministry, because what this speaks powerfully into is the role of the deacon, whom we have raised up among us and said to these men, it is your job. It is your job to be constantly on the watch, constantly on the look for those among the family of God for whom this applies. Those among the family of God who, for the sake of Christ or for the sake of just difficulties in life, as part of the family of God, there are ways in which we can come alongside you and be lands for you, houses for you, brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers for you. So there's much to be said there. We're just going to have to touch on that and move on, that this really speaks powerfully into the diaconate ministry among the context of the family of God. But notice also Jesus throws in something else here. He says, there is none who have left these things, house, lands, brothers, sisters, mother, father, or children or lands for my sake and for the gospel, verse 30, who will not receive 100-fold now in this time, houses and brothers and sisters and mothers and children and lands with persecutions. So he just sort of slides that in there, with persecutions. And you've got to recognize the honesty and the forthright openness of Christ to say, with the family of God comes persecutions. Now, persecutions, if we had more time to flesh this out, there's much about this passage that we're going to just mention and leave expanded upon, should we say. We're going to leave ourselves lots of material to talk about Wednesday night, which, by the way, I'm speaking somewhere else Wednesday night. So, Brother Danny, we're giving you just a gift here on a silver platter. You're going to have tons to talk about this coming Wednesday, because persecutions, we really could rightly say, is the biggest blessing that Jesus mentions. Because the persecutions that he speaks of, they are the clearest indicator that these people belong to the family of God. And so these persecutions that Jesus says will accompany the blessings, along with the family of God who comes alongside you to say, we are your brothers, we are your sisters, you are our father, we are your children. That relationship, you need a house, here it is. You need a car to drive, here it is. Along with that, the greatest blessing would be the persecutions that accompany that, because the Scriptures tell us plainly that that is the clearest assurance that the answer to Peter's question is, yes, you're on the right path. Peter says, what's in store for us? How do we know we're on the right path? How do we know our camel has passed through the eye of the needle? Jesus would answer that by saying, well, the first way you know that is, are you being treated like me? Are you being treated like your master? Your master was persecuted. If you're being treated like me, then that's a pretty good indication that you are on that right path.